You ever meet someone who thinks they actually own the sunlight hitting the pavement, like they personally filed a permit for the morning rays and you're just trespassing in their world? Yeah, I ran into one of those human roadblocks about 6 months ago, and let me tell you, it was the kind of standoff that makes 25 years of chasing federal fugitives look like a walk in the park. My name is Lucas Vance, and for a quarter of a century, I carried a badge for the U.S. Marshal Service. I've tracked cartel runners through the swamps of Louisiana and dragged wire fraud specialists out of penthouses in Manhattan, so when I finally hung up the holster, I wasn't looking for trouble, I was looking for a porch, a river view, and silence so thick you could cut it with a knife. I found that slice of heaven in a place called Oakhaven Estates, a little secluded riverside community up in the Pacific Northwest where the mist hangs low in the mornings and the houses are these beautiful, historic Victorian monsters that look like they have stories to tell. I bought the place cash, sight unseen mostly, just trusted the paperwork and the photos, and I figured the hardest part of my retirement would be learning how to fly fish without hooking my own ear. But boy, was I wrong, because I hadn't factored in the Oakhaven Historical Preservation Society, which is just a fancy name for a dictatorship run by a woman named Patricia Ellsworth. Now, picture moving day, I'm steering this massive rental truck down a cobblestone driveway, the air smells like pine and rain, and I'm feeling that specific kind of relief you only get when you think the job is finally done. I step out of the cab, stretch my back which isn't what it used to be, and there she is. Patricia. She's standing at the foot of my porch steps like a gatekeeper to the afterlife, wearing this beige cashmere ensemble that probably cost more than my first car, holding a leather-bound folio against her chest like a shield. She didn't shout, she didn't wave her arms, she just stared with this terrifying, calm disapproval, the kind that makes you check your zipper. "You're blocking the aesthetic flow of the promenade," she said. That was her opening line, not "hello," not "welcome to the neighborhood," just an accusation about aesthetic flow. I tried to play the nice guy, gave her the "ah shucks" routine, introduced myself as Luke, said I'd have the truck moved by sundown, but Patricia wasn't interested in pleasantries, she was interested in dominance. She opens that leather folio and hands me a document on paper so thick it felt like cardstock, and right there at the top, embossed in gold foil, was a bill for $55,000. I actually laughed, I couldn't help it, a deep belly laugh that echoed off the wet trees, because I thought it was a hazing ritual or a joke, but Patricia didn't even blink. She told me it was the new resident preservation impact fee, plus a penalty for bringing a commercial vehicle onto historic cobblestones, and an expedited processing charge if I wanted to sleep in my own house that night. 55 grand, just to turn the key in a door I already owned. When I handed the paper back and told her that I'd read the title report and the bylaws and there was absolutely no mention of an impact fee, her face changed. It didn't get red, it got cold, like a reptile watching a fly land just a little too close. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice dropping an octave, "paperwork is for the county clerks. Down here in the hollow, we operate by the society's standards, and I am the society. You pay the fee, or you don't move in, it's really that binary." I told her to get off my property before I called the cops, and that's when she smiled, a thin, razor-wire smile, and said, "Oh, I wouldn't bother calling them, Lucas, they're already on their way." That should have been my first clue that I wasn't dealing with a normal HOA president, but I was still thinking like a civilian, thinking that logic and property laws still applied here. By that evening, the psychological warfare had started, and these people were pros. It began with my truck being boxed in by 3 SUVs, all perfectly parked so I couldn't back out, then came the citations taped to my front door every hour on the hour. Improper porch lighting luminescence, unauthorized curtain fabric visible from street, grass height exceeding regulation by 0.4 inches, I mean, I hadn't even unpacked my socks yet and I was technically owing them another 4 grand in fines. I went out the next morning to grab the paper and saw my neighbor, an old guy named Mr. Henderson, sweeping his porch about 50 yards away. I waved, tried to be friendly, and the look of sheer terror on this man's face broke my heart. He looked around like he was being watched by a sniper, quickly put a finger to his lips, and scurried inside like a frightened mouse. That's when the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, that old instinct from my martial days kicking in, because that wasn't annoyance on his face, that was fear, genuine, survival mode fear. This wasn't a neighborhood dispute, this was a hostage situation disguised as a gated community. I decided to do a little reconnaissance, so I walked down to the community center where they were holding their weekly society meeting, and what I saw in there made my blood boil. It was a kangaroo court. Patricia was sitting on a raised dais like a queen, and there were these residents, good people, standing before her pleading for mercy. I watched a young couple crying because Patricia was fining them $10,000 for painting their nursery a shade of yellow that wasn't on the approved historic palette, telling them she'd put a lien on their house if they didn't pay by Friday. I watched her threaten to bankrupt a local baker because his delivery van had a rust spot on the bumper. It was a racket, plain and simple extortion wrapped in the American flag and historical preservation statutes, and sitting right next to her, looking bored and cleaning his fingernails with a pocket knife, was a man in a police uniform. That was Chief Elias Thorne, a guy built like a vending machine with a badge that looked too shiny and eyes that looked too dull. I watched him lean over and whisper something to Patricia, and they both looked right at me, standing in the back of the room, and laughed. It wasn't a funny laugh, it was the laugh of predators who think they're looking at prey. I walked out of there knowing I had two choices: I could pay the $55 grand, keep my head down, and live in misery, or I could do what I've done for 30 years, burn the corruption to the ground. I chose option 2, obviously, but I knew I couldn't just flash a badge and end it. I needed them to hang themselves, I needed them to feel so invincible that they'd make a mistake, a big one. So, I played the victim. I spent the next 3 days letting them escalate, letting them slash my tires, which they did, all 4 of them, with surgical precision, letting them cut my water line, letting them pile up the threats. By Friday, Patricia was practically vibrating with power. She showed up at my house again, this time with Chief Thorne and 2 deputies flanking her, and a small crowd of terrified neighbors watching from behind their curtains. She told me my time was up: pay the now $70,000 in accumulated fees and fines, or get arrested for defrauding the Preservation Society and criminal trespassing on my own land. It was absurd, it was illegal, and it was exactly what I was waiting for. "Last chance, Mr. Vance," Thorne grunted, his hand resting on his service weapon in a way that was meant to be intimidating but just looked sloppy to a trained eye. "Patty here says you're a squatter, and in my town, we don't take kindly to squatters disrespecting our heritage." I looked at the neighbors. I saw Mr. Henderson peeking through his blinds, I saw the young couple holding their baby on their porch, and I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. "You really think you can just bully people out of their life savings?" I asked, keeping my voice level, keeping my hands visible. "You think because you have a badge and a clipboard, you're gods?" Patty laughed, and it was a sound like glass breaking. "We are gods here, Lucas," she hissed, stepping into my personal space, poking a manicured finger into my chest. "This is Oak Haven. The law stops at the main gate. In here, I am the judge, the jury, and the executioner, and Elias here is the sword. Now, get your wallet, or get in the squad car." I looked at Thorne. "You going to go along with this, Chief? You really want to put cuffs on a man for refusing to pay a bribe?" Thorne smirked, pulling his handcuffs from his belt, letting them rattle for effect. "It's not a bribe, son. It's the cost of doing business. Turn around. You're under arrest." I took a deep breath, listening to the rain start to patter against the brim of my hat, and I felt that familiar calm wash over me, the calm before the takedown. "All right," I said softly, reaching slowly toward my back pocket. "Let me just get my ID. I think there's been a misunderstanding about jurisdiction." The rain was coming down harder now, turning the cobblestones slick and gray, a perfect backdrop for the absolute circus that was about to unfold in my driveway. Chief Thorne watched my hand move toward my back pocket, his eyes narrowed, anticipating a wallet, maybe a checkbook. Hell, he probably thought I was reaching for a wad of cash to beg for forgiveness. Patty was practically preening, checking her reflection in the side mirror of the squad car, already composing the victory speech she'd give at the next board meeting about how she crushed the outsider. The neighbors had started to trickle out onto their lawns, drawn by the flashing lights and the sheer volume of Patty's screeching. it was like a slow-motion car crash that nobody could look away from. Slowly, Vance, Thorne barked, trying to sound like a TV cop, putting his hand on the grip of his pistol. 2 fingers. Don't make me nervous. I kept my movements fluid, deliberate, muscle memory from 1,000 high-risk warrant services taking over. I wasn't scared, I was actually fighting back a smile because I knew exactly what was in that leather wallet, and I knew exactly what it was going to do to the little kingdom these two had built. I pulled the bifold out, held it closed for a second, just letting the tension hang in the damp air like smoke. "You know, Chief," I said, my voice cutting through the sound of the rain, loud enough for Mr. Henderson and the young couple across the street to hear. "I tried to tell you guys. I tried to show you the permits. I tried to explain that federal property laws apply even in your little fairy tale kingdom. But you insisted on doing this the hard way. Shut up and show me the ID." Patty screamed, losing patience, stomping her designer boot into a puddle. "Arrest him, Elias. He's stalling." I flipped the wallet open. It wasn't a driver's license. It was a gold, 7-point star badge, heavy and scarred from years of service, resting next to a laminated federal ID card that identified me as a senior deputy U.S. Marshal, retired, but with active consultant status and full carry privileges. But that wasn't the kicker. The kicker was the folded piece of paper I pulled out from behind the badge. "Chief Thorne," I said, my tone dropping the confused retiree act completely, shifting into command voice. "I'm pretty sure you recognize the seal of the Department of Justice. But in case your reading glasses are foggy, this is a federal warrant for the seizure of all financial records related to the Oakhaven Preservation Society, and a separate warrant for the arrest of Patricia Ellsworth for wire fraud, racketeering, and extortion." The silence that followed was louder than a gunshot. Thorne froze. His face went through a complex series of colors, red, then a sickly paste white, then a sort of gray that matched the sky. He looked at the badge, then at the warrant, then at me, and I saw the realization hit him like a physical blow. He wasn't bullying a tourist, he was threatening a Fed who had spent decades hunting people significantly scarier than him. He took his hand off his gun so fast it looked like it burned him. Deputy Marshal." Thorne stammered, his voice cracking. We didn't, nobody told us." "Nobody told you not to run a protection racket under the color of authority?" I stepped closer, closing the distance, using my height to loom over him. "You need a memo for that, Chief." Patty, however, was in total denial. Her narcissism was a fortress that reality couldn't penetrate yet. She snatched the warrant from Thorne's hand, squinting at it in the rain. "This is fake. This is printed on, this is ridiculous. You can't arrest me. I own this street. Elias, shoot him. He's forging documents." "Patty, shut up," Thorne hissed, backing away from her, putting his hands up in a placating gesture toward me. "Sir, look, I was just responding to a call. I didn't know the specifics of the fees. I was led to believe." "Save it for the indictment, Elias," I said, pulling out my own handcuffs, the real ones, steel and heavy. "Turn around. Now." And that's when the dam broke. The neighbors, who had been terrified statues for years, started moving. Mr. Henderson was the first one. He walked right up to the edge of my driveway, ignoring the rain soaking his sweater. "He charged me $3,000 for a bird feeder, officer," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Patty. "He said he'd condemn my house." Then the young mother stepped forward. "They told us they'd take our kids if we didn't pay the quiet enjoyment tax." It was like watching a spell lift. Suddenly, 20 people were shouting, crying, pointing, releasing years of pent-up rage. Patty was looking around wildly, realizing her army was deserting her, her muscle was currently getting cuffed by the new guy, and her kingdom was burning down. When I clicked the cuffs onto Thorne, I looked at his 2 deputies, young kids, clearly confused, and said, "You boys can either be witnesses or co-conspirators. Your choice." They practically tripped over themselves offering to help secure the scene. I walked over to Patty. She was trembling now, clutching her clipboard like a life raft. "You can't do this," she whispered, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "I kept this neighborhood pure. I kept the property values up. I did this for them." "No, Patty," I said, gently taking the clipboard from her and tossing it onto the wet grass. "You did it because you're small, and making other people afraid made you feel big. Turn around." The ride to the county jail, escorted by the state police who I'd called about 10 minutes before the showdown, was quiet. The aftermath, however, was loud. It took about 3 months for the full scope to come out. It wasn't just 55 grand here and there. The Preservation Society had funneled nearly $4 million into offshore accounts over a decade. Patty wasn't preserving history, she was funding a luxury condo development in Costa Rica. Chief Thorne had been taking a 30% cut to act as her enforcer. They both went away for a long time. Thorne took a plea deal to roll on Patty, got 8 years. Patty fought it, tried to represent herself in court, screamed at the judge that he didn't understand historical aesthetics, and got slapped with 15 years in federal prison. Oakhaven changed overnight. The fear evaporated. People started painting their houses whatever color they wanted. Mr. Henderson planted a garden that was wildly, historically inaccurate, but absolutely beautiful. We had a block party a month later, and for the first time, nobody was looking over their shoulder. I finally got to sit on my porch, drink my coffee, and watch the river run without wondering if I was being fined for the steam coming off my mug. But here's the thing that sticks with me, the part that keeps me up sometimes when the wind howls through the valley. It wasn't just Patty and Thorne. When the feds went through the books, they found a list of compliant residents, people who got discounts on their fees in exchange for spying on their neighbors. Some of the people who cheered the loudest when I arrested Patty were the same ones who had been texting her photos of my truck just days before. It makes you wonder about the nature of power, doesn't it? Take away the tyrant, and everyone celebrates, but how many of them were just waiting for their turn to hold the clipboard? I'm retired, technically, but my phone rang yesterday. A woman from a condo board in Florida, saying she heard about what happened in Oakhaven. Said she thinks her HOA president is bugging the apartments. I told her I'm just a fisherman now, but I didn't hang up. So, let me ask you this, if you were in Mr. Henderson's shoes, terrified and losing your savings, would you have stood up sooner? Or is it easier to pay the extortion fee and look the other way until a guy with a badge shows up to save you? Drop a comment below. I really want to know what you think. Are we programmed to follow orders, or are we just waiting for the right moment to rebel? I'm Lucas Vance, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe out there.